how long can we depend on it staying, Doc?
10, 15 minutes?
That's not much time. That's plenty of time if everybody does what he's supposed to do.
The world saw the Rat Pack as an unbreakable brotherhood, but behind the tuxedoes and the bourbon, Sammy Davis Jr. was walking a tightrope that few could see. While Frank Sinatra ruled Vegas, Sammy had to survive it, often under the fierce, almost obsessive protection of Old Blue Eyes himself. For decades, fans suspected that their bond wasn't just about music. It was a bond meant to keep Sammy safe from a world that wanted him gone. In his final days, Sinatra finally stopped playing coy and confirmed the one thing we always suspected. So what did Sinatra reveal? And why did he wait until Sammy was gone to finally speak up? Join us as we get into all the details. The unshakable brotherhood of Sinatra and Davis. Long before the Rat Pack became legend, before Vegas turned their names into neon, their story began quietly backstage in Detroit in 1941. The Will Maston Trio had the opening slot for Tommy Dorsey and his orchestra, and Frank Sinatra, just 26, was the young lead singer drawing attention night after night. Sammy Davis Jr. was only 15 then, already sharp, already seasoned beyond his years. Somewhere between rehearsals and curtain calls they met, and what started as a casual introduction settled into something that felt instinctive. They went their separate ways as touring schedules shifted, but the connection never fully disappeared. In 1945, Sammy showed up at the stage door of Frank's CBS radio show in Los Angeles, not as a stranger but as someone continuing a conversation that had simply paused. That quiet re-entry mattered. It showed that whatever had sparked in Detroit hadn't burnt out. By 1947, Sinatra had enough influence to shape his own stage. When it came time to choose an opening act for his 3-week run at the Capitol Theater in New York, he made it personal and requested the Will Maston Trio. At the time, Sammy's role leaned heavily on impressions. He could mimic other singers flawlessly, sliding into their voices with ease, and audiences loved it. But Sinatra saw something deeper and urged him to step out from behind imitation and sing in his own voice. That encouragement wasn't just artistic advice. It was a vote of confidence that stayed with Sammy long after the applause faded. Their bond deepened not just through music, but through moments that revealed the world they were navigating. In March 1950, Sammy went to see Frank perform at the Copacabana in New York with Buddy Rich. And at the door, he was turned away because of the color of his skin. Sinatra heard what happened and insisted that Sammy return the following night alone, making sure he was admitted. It wasn't a public spectacle. It was instinct, loyalty, without hesitation. By then, Sammy's admiration for Frank had grown into something close to reverence. He didn't just respect him, he studied him. He wanted the suits, the posture, and the effortless control of a room. He even styled his hair in that familiar Sinatra fashion, complete with the small curl resting just right, because in his eyes, Frank wasn't just a star, he was a blueprint. Then came November 19, 1954, a morning that could have ended everything. Sammy was driving from Las Vegas to Los Angeles to record the soundtrack for 6 Bridges to Cross when a car backed out in front of him, and the collision left his face shattered. His nose was broken, and the damage to his left eye was so severe it had to be replaced with a plastic one. In the quiet aftermath, while the world waited to see whether he would ever perform again, Sinatra stepped in without fanfare. He handled the medical bills. He gave Sammy a place to stay. He made sure the foundation was steady before the spotlight returned. 2 months later, Sammy was back on stage, but he wasn't standing there alone. He never really was. Their friendship carried weight because of the era they lived in. An Italian-American superstar at the height of his influence, and a black entertainer fighting for space in rooms that often tried to exclude him. Yet on stage their chemistry felt effortless, and offstage their loyalty felt unshakable. When a theater barred Sammy because of his race, Sinatra tore up his own contract rather than perform without him. When segregation policies at the Sands Hotel in Las Vegas prevented Sammy from staying there, Sinatra refused to take the stage. He understood the power of his name and chose to use it as leverage. This wasn't a sudden awakening for him. Years earlier, he had starred in The House I Live In, a short film addressing prejudice, urging children not to judge others by religion or background. As his solo career grew, he hired the best musicians regardless of ethnicity and ensured equal pay. He later wrote that a friend to him had no race or class, that friendship was built on affection and mutual respect, values that could not be divided into categories. Those weren't just words. They echoed in the way he stood beside Sammy. Partly because of Sinatra's influence, Sammy received the opportunity to star in a Las Vegas show in 1953 as part of the Will Maston Trio, and they became the first African Americans to be offered a complimentary room, drinks, and full access to a casino on the Strip. In 1954, Sammy opened for Sinatra at the Sands, and by 1960, agreements in Las Vegas finally brought segregation policies to an end. Change didn't arrive overnight, but pressure from powerful voices helped move the line forward. Through it all, what began in Detroit as a simple backstage meeting evolved into something deeper than professional respect. Sinatra became a big brother figure, a shield when the world turned hostile. And for Sammy, that loyalty wasn't abstract. It was personal, immediate, and life-altering. By the time the Rat Pack stood under the lights in tailored tuxedos, laughing through cigarette smoke and applause, their bond had already been forged in quieter rooms and harder moments. Beneath the glamour and the legend was a friendship that started when neither of them knew how large their names would become, yet both understood the value of standing side by side as they did. The peak of the Rat Pack. By the time 1960 arrived, everything they had been building finally came together in one place. Sinatra, Martin, Davis, Lawford, and Bishop stepped in front of the cameras for Ocean's 11, with filming beginning in Las Vegas on January 26th. But the movie was only part of it. The real story unfolded at night. After long days on set, they walked across to the Sands Hotel and took the stage for a nightclub act they called The Summit. The name was a joke, a nod to the upcoming East-West political summit being discussed in Paris. While world leaders gathered to negotiate global power, these five held their own summit in Vegas. Their version involved martinis, sharp jokes, and the kind of chemistry you couldn't rehearse. Word spread fast. Hotels along the Strip filled up. Flights into Las Vegas were booked solid. People came from all over the country because they sensed something rare was happening. This wasn't just another show. It felt loose, unpredictable, and alive. Even John F. Kennedy stopped by during a campaign visit, staying at the Sands and moving easily through that world of politics and show business. During that visit, Sinatra introduced him to Judith Campbell, a connection that would grow into an affair lasting more than a year. The Sands stage had become more than entertainment. It was a meeting point for power. Ocean's 11 itself almost felt like an excuse to keep the party going. On screen, they played World War II veterans brought together by Danny Ocean to rob 5 Las Vegas casinos in a single night. The Sahara, Riviera, Desert Inn, Sands, and Flamingo became part of the fictional heist. Off-screen, the mood was just as relaxed. They stayed up late, teased each other endlessly, and treated the shoot like an extension of their act. Sammy played Josh Howard and performed EO11, giving the film a burst of energy only he could deliver. The movie became the 8th highest-grossing film of 1960. But more than box office numbers, it locked the Rat Pack image into pop culture. They reunited the following year in Utah to film Sergeants 3, a Western twist on Gunga Din, with Sammy stepping into the equivalent of the Gunga Din role. The film didn't perform as strongly, but the connection between them kept drawing attention. In 1962, Sinatra and Martin teamed up again for 4 for Texas. Sammy appeared in Johnny Cool, produced by Lawford, and sang the title theme written by longtime collaborators Sammy Cahn and Jimmy Van Heusen. Even when all 5 weren't together, their careers overlapped constantly. Still, it was their live performances that truly defined the peak years. On stage, especially as the trio of Sinatra, Martin, and Davis, they were sharp and fearless. The jokes moved fast. Nothing felt rehearsed. In August 1962, they performed at the 500 Club in Atlantic City as a favor to Paul "Skinny" D'Amato. In November, they appeared at Villa Venice in Chicago as a thank you to Sam Giancana for his support during Kennedy's presidential campaign. Those appearances caught the attention of the FBI, which began looking more closely at their contracts and associations. Recordings from those shows still exist, capturing the edge beneath the humor. Sammy often found himself at the center of the sharpest jokes. Many of them leaned into race, and even at the time, observers questioned how he balanced those moments with the real bond behind the scenes. Some believed the humor was meant to mock bigotry rather than reinforce it. Others saw it as more complicated. Sammy knew people viewed him as Sinatra's acolyte, sometimes even his lackey. That perception followed him for years, but the dynamic slowly changed. What began as mentor and protege became something closer to equals. In 1980, Davis reflected that he loved Sinatra deeply and admitted that while he might once have been seen as a little mascot, he was no longer that. The relationship had evolved. They returned to the Sands for another summit in January 1963 and again in September, but the atmosphere around them was shifting. Sinatra was forced to sell his ownership stake in the Sands that year because of scrutiny over his connections to organized crime. There was irony in what came next. Their next major project, Robin and the Seven Hoods, was a musical spoof about organized crime set in Prohibition-era Chicago. Filmed in November 1963, it reunited Sinatra, Martin, and Davis on screen. Peter Lawford was originally meant to appear, but after a falling out with Sinatra, his role went to Bing Crosby. The cracks were starting to show. By the mid-1960s, the intensity of the Rat Pack era began to fade. Aside from a 1965 charity concert in St. Louis, where Sinatra, Martin, and Davis performed together backed by Count Basie's band and introduced by Johnny Carson, their collective appearances became less frequent. Sammy returned to Broadway in Golden Boy. Dean focused on his Matt Helm films. Sinatra continued expanding his empire. They still crossed paths. Sammy appeared on The Dean Martin Show in 1970 and later became the subject of a Dean Martin celebrity roast in 1975. But tensions surfaced, especially during the mid-1970s when Sammy's drug problems strained his relationship with Sinatra. The brotherhood had weathered a lot, but it wasn't immune to conflict. It wasn't until May 1978 that Sinatra, Martin, and Davis stood on stage together again at the Cher Boomtown Party in Santa Monica. By then, the industry had changed. The cultural moment had shifted. The Rat Pack had already become legend. But when they stood side by side again, it was clear that what they had built in those early 1960s nights at the Sands had never fully disappeared. For a few electric years, they didn't just dominate Las Vegas, they defined it. And even as time pulled them in different directions, the peak of the Rat Pack remained frozen in memory, sharp and untouchable. The Exile of Peter Lawford. Peter Lawford's place in the Rat Pack didn't end with a slow drift. It ended with a decision. And that decision belonged to Frank Sinatra. By the early 1960s, Lawford's value inside the group had shifted. He wasn't just another performer. Through his marriage to Patricia Kennedy, he was Sinatra's connection to the White House. That connection mattered. Sinatra admired the Kennedys. He campaigned for John F. Kennedy. He wanted proximity to power, and Lawford provided it. Then came 1962. Sinatra had gone all in preparing his Palm Springs estate for a presidential visit. The house was remodeled. A helipad was installed. The expectation was clear. President Kennedy would stay there. But at the last minute, the White House canceled the visit, citing concerns about Sinatra's alleged mob associations. Lawford was tasked with delivering the news. It didn't matter that he wasn't the one who made the decision. In Sinatra's mind, Lawford had failed him. Whether it was weakness, divided loyalty, or simple proximity to the cancellation, Sinatra saw it as betrayal. The reaction was immediate and unforgiving. The helipad that had been built in anticipation was reportedly torn up. Photographs of Lawford were destroyed, and just like that, the friendship was over. There was no cooling period, no quiet tension. Sinatra cut him off. Lawford was removed from Robin and the Seven Hoods, a project already in motion. His role was reassigned to Bing Crosby. It wasn't subtle, it was a message. From that point forward, Lawford was no longer part of the inner circle. Sinatra banned him from shows, from parties, from the casual mentions that once kept him tethered to the group. In private conversations, if his name came up, the tone shifted. The door had been shut. Lawford tried to mend it. He reached out through mutual friends. He made it known that he wanted reconciliation. But Sinatra did not respond. Pride and anger had hardened into something permanent. Unlike the eventual fallout and reunion between Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr., this rift never found a stage moment to repair it. There was no surprise duet, no emotional embrace under the spotlight. By the mid-1960s, Lawford was fully outside the Rat Pack orbit. The bond that once placed him beside Sinatra in films and on stage had dissolved into silence. His marriage to Patricia Kennedy ended in 1966, further distancing him from the political world that had once amplified his importance. As the years passed, Lawford's association with the Rat Pack became something he was spoken about in connection to, not as an active participant in. The break with Sinatra remained unresolved. When Lawford died in December 1984 at 61, no Rat Pack members attended the funeral. The falling out had never been repaired, and in Sinatra's world, once you were out, you were out. The final fracture. For decades, Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr. moved through the entertainment world as if they were permanently linked. Their names spoken in the same breath, their histories braided together from the 1940s onwards. What began as a meeting between a young singer and a teenage prodigy grew into one of the most fabled friendships in show business, strengthened through the Rat Pack years, through films like Ocean's 11, and through long nights at the Sands where they stood shoulder to shoulder and made Las Vegas feel like the center of the universe. They weren't just colleagues, they were pillars in each other's lives, which is why the silence that fell between them in the late 1970s cut so deep. By then, the mythology was already cemented. The tuxedos, the cigarettes, the martinis, the improvisation that blurred the line between performance and real life. But beneath that polished image, something was shifting. The divide didn't come from ego or money or billing order. It came from something far more personal and far more destructive. Frank didn't do C.E. Sammy did. For years, alcohol and smoke had been part of the Rat Pack's public persona, woven into their swagger. But Sinatra drew a hard line at anything beyond that, and he expected the men in his circle to respect it. Sammy, a decade younger and carrying his own weight of expectations, was drifting in a different direction. After his marriage to Swedish actress May-Britt ended in 1968, Sammy found himself unmoored. The country was in the middle of the civil rights era, and every performance felt charged. He was exhausted from trying to please everyone, weary of constantly being measured against Sinatra's towering presence, and quietly wrestling with the loneliness that followed him even in crowded rooms. He remarried dancer Altovise Gore, but the ache didn't disappear. Instead, he leaned into the excesses of the counterculture, opening his marriage, experimenting with SX parties, and even brushing up against the orbit of Anton LaVey and the Church of Satan for a time. It was rebellion, curiosity, distraction, maybe all three. By the end of the 1970s, the scene around him had hardened into something darker. Cocaine became a regular presence. The toll showed in his body, in his finances, and in the way people around him began to worry. Sinatra didn't look the other way. True to form, he confronted Sammy directly. Clean up or lose the friendship. It wasn't framed as drama, it was framed as a consequence, an ultimatum delivered in the blunt, unvarnished style Frank had always used. To those who watched it unfold, it felt almost inevitable. Sammy, by then, was spiraling, and Frank had never tolerated chaos in his inner circle. And when Sammy didn't immediately change, Sinatra did what few believed he would ever do. He closed the door. For 3, maybe 4 years, they barely spoke. There were brief, polite exchanges at social events, cordial but cold. The warmth was gone. For a friendship that had once felt unbreakable, the absence was deafening. Sammy was devastated. No matter how fiercely he tried to assert independence, no matter how much he pushed against the image of being Sinatra's acolyte, Frank's absence left a wound. He had grown up in that shadow, learned from it, fought against it, and ultimately loved the man casting it. Losing him wasn't rebellion anymore. It was loss. For Sinatra, the silence wasn't easy either, but he was rigid when he believed he was right. To him, this wasn't about pride. It was about watching someone he considered a brother destroy himself. Time, however, has a way of softening even the hardest stances. As the 1980s approached, health concerns began forcing Sammy to confront the reality of his lifestyle. Word traveled back through quiet channels. Conversations began to thaw. Behind the scenes, Alto Weiss and Sinatra's wife Barbara worked carefully and patiently to ease the tension. Then came the night in Las Vegas. Sammy called comedian Tom Dreesen ahead of a shared engagement and asked him to fly in a day early. His voice, by all accounts, was electric with excitement. He couldn't contain it. He and Frank had made up. It was real. The fences were mended. There would be dinner between shows, the 4 of them together, and then they would watch Frank's closing performance. What Sammy didn't mention was the surprise he had planned. The show began like any other. Frank moved through his set, commanding the stage the way he always had. Then he launched into "The Lady is a Tramp." Somewhere in the middle of the song, Sammy leapt onto one of the long tables near the stage and ran straight toward the spotlight. The audience saw him before Frank did, and the room erupted. He jumped onto the stage, grabbed a microphone, and joined in. The moment wasn't rehearsed, it wasn't calculated. It was instinct and joy colliding in real time. They stood there together again, voices weaving into a song they both knew by heart, and for a few minutes the years of silence dissolved. To those watching, it felt bigger than entertainment. It felt like something sacred being restored. Sammy afterwards was almost giddy, like a younger brother reunited with someone he thought he might have lost for good. The tension, the distance, the pride, all of it seemed to fall away under the stage lights. In the end, the foundation that had been built decades earlier proved stronger than the fracture. They had fought. They had drawn lines. They had hurt each other. But what held them together wasn't just shared history or shared fame. It was something closer to blood. They really were brothers. Before death, Frank Sinatra confirmed what we suspected on Sammy Davis Jr. By May 1990, the voice that had once lit up every stage from Harlem to the Sands was fading. Sammy Davis Jr., only 64, was dying of throat cancer. He had spent weeks in and out of Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles, his body weakening in ways that felt cruelly ironic for a man who had given everything to performance. The energy that once seemed endless had slowed, but the stories about him never did. Those closest to him kept repeating the same truth. Sammy wasn't just a once-in-a-generation entertainer. He was a once-in-a-lifetime friend. For Frank Sinatra, the loss was not a public spectacle. It was personal history collapsing in real time. When he spoke after Sammy's death, the words carried the weight of 4 decades. He reflected that it was difficult to compress more than 40 years of friendship into a few sentences. He wished the world could have known Sam the way he had known him. He said that Sammy never gave less than 100% on stage and gave even more to those fortunate enough to call him a friend. He added that it was a generous God who had given them Sammy for so many years, and that the thought of heaven holding his magic brought him warmth. That wasn't Rat Pack banter. That was grief. Sinatra canceled tour dates immediately and flew to California. At the funeral, he sat in the front row, not as the towering icon, but as a man saying goodbye to his brother. He served as an honorary pallbearer. Dean Martin was there. So were Stevie Wonder, Robert Guillaume, and Liza Minnelli. The room held decades of music and memory. Outside, the tribute stretched beyond the chapel walls. In Las Vegas, the lights on the Strip went dark for 10 minutes, a rare pause in a city built on constant glow. On Hollywood Boulevard, tap dancers gathered at Sammy's Star. Hundreds of cars followed the procession from the memorial to the gravesite. For a performer who had once leapt onto tables and stolen stages, the farewell felt fittingly theatrical, but also deeply human. After Sammy was gone, the circle grew smaller. In his final years, Sinatra's own health deteriorated. Heart problems, breathing issues, high blood pressure, pneumonia, bladder cancer, hospital stays became more frequent. After a heart attack in February 1997, he stopped making public appearances entirely. The man who once owned every room began retreating from them. On the evening of May 14, 1998, just 2 days before the anniversary of Sammy's death, Sinatra suffered another heart attack at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. He was 82. His wife, Barbara, was at his side. As doctors worked to stabilize him, she urged him to keep fighting. His final words were reported to be that he was losing. When he died, the tributes echoed the way they had for Sammy. The Empire State Building glowed blue. The lights along the Las Vegas Strip dimmed again, casinos pausing for a moment of stillness. Around the world, record sales surged as people reached for the music that had defined their lives. His funeral was held at the Church of the Good Shepherd in Beverly Hills on May 20, 1998. Inside, 400 mourners gathered. Outside, thousands of fans waited. Gregory Peck and Tony Bennett and his son Frank Jr. addressed the room. The ceremony was dignified, restrained, and almost understated for a man whose presence had once felt seismic. He was buried in a blue business suit at Desert Memorial Park in Cathedral City, next to his parents. On his grave marker were the words, "The best is yet to come," and "Beloved husband and father." Years later, after damage to the original stone, the inscription was changed to read, "Sleep warm, Papa." By the time Sinatra was laid to rest, the era that he, Sammy, Dean, Lawford, and Bishop had embodied was no longer just fading, it was gone. But what remained was something harder to extinguish. A friendship that began backstage in the 1940s and survived fame, politics, addiction, silence, and reconciliation. Two men who had challenged each other, protected each other, hurt each other, and ultimately stood beside each other until the end. What are your thoughts on Sinatra's and Sammy Davis Jr.'s friendship? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also click the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.